Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I was observing the behavior of a nurse not long ago, and she had this marvelous ability to teach and to show people how to do things and so on. And you could just see great wisdom she had accumulated over a period of time that she was willing to share with others then, and to help them in their convalescence and so on.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Father Robert Wilhelm, who is pastor of St. John the Baptist Roman Catholic Church in Toledo. Father Bacik and Father Wilhelm will discuss the crucified Christ, searching for wisdom. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Bob, I appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule to be with me. It's nice to have a theologian, pastor present to speak with me a little bit about the Scriptures, one of the major themes in the Scriptures, that is wisdom. I'm on the topic of searching for genuine wisdom, and I'm taking off from a passage in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 1, verses 22 to 25, and it said, "Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and an absurdity to Gentiles. But to those who are called, Jews and Gentiles alike, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God." And that's, I would like to deal a little bit with that question of wisdom and the search for wisdom in life. I guess when I think of wisdom, and I think you and I studied this back in the seminary days, wisdom had to do with having knowing the general principles of things, of having the large perspective on life, and of I guess we also associate it with older people who have gotten it together, or understand things, and so on. What notes come to your mind when we're talking wisdom like that?
Well, I think I can identify, Jim, with what you're saying in terms of where our background has come from in the seminary, but I guess maybe in a practical level, I kind of see wisdom, sometimes very much associated with those who have had some untoward experiences and have come to know, those who have tested things. But at the same time, I'm not sure that I don't see it in terms of some very practical figuring out, hey, what works, what makes life beautiful, good, worth living, satisfying, my job, my family, satisfying to me, and giving some rewards that I can just shortcut some of the dumb things that I've done, and some of the things that seem so alluring, seem so attractive, that seem so wise, worldly wise, and that maybe that the Scriptures have been that guide to say, we can be this shortcut. Pay attention here. There's somebody did some thinking about this, and we can get into some very practical areas of making sense out of this human existence and having a rewarding life.
I'm thinking right away, you're talking like that, of the Hebrew Scriptures and the books of wisdom that have that very practical kind of flavor to them.
Not a whole lot of theological emphasis on them, and yet there's some very great and lofty thoughts that call man to greatness and enable one to achieve goodness, and goodness both for himself or herself, as well as for the community and the kingdom at large.
I think we respect people like that, who have practical know-how, who can get things done, who have sort of the ability to make their way in life and to make a difference in life. I was observing the behavior of a nurse not long ago, and she had this marvelous ability to teach and to show people how to do things and so on. And you could just see great wisdom she had accumulated over a period of time that she was willing to share with others then, and to help them in their convalescence and so on. That would be an example, I think, of that kind of practical wisdom that you're talking about.
Exactly. Not always a whole bunch of theory and sitting down in a teaching situation, but almost teaching by doing and showing, and willingness to share the goodness that they have experienced and picked up over their existence.
I guess when we're talking about wisdom, Bob, if you look at the opposite, I guess we usually think of foolishness, of living in a foolish way in life, of an unenlightened way or an ineffective kind of way. And we might spend a little time talking about what goes wrong in the search for wisdom. I'm thinking of the whole business of idol making. There's a passage in Exodus 20, 1 to 17, where God delivers the commandments to his people, and he says, "I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not carve idols for yourselves." And I was thinking carve idols for yourself is an interesting phrase, because it's so easy to make idols for ourselves. This isn't just to make an image of a god, but to make an idol is to take something that is of preliminary value and to raise it up and make an absolute out of it. You know, to make more out of something than it deserves. And so I say part of being foolish in life is to make idols.
Well, I think we do that a lot, and I'm in the we includes me.
Yeah.
That something grabs my fancy and it just becomes almost obsessive, in the sense that, you know, that becomes the focal point of what I'm doing, and I lose a sense of perspective, and it seems so gratifying in the instant, in the moment, and I'm not willing to let go of that. I want to hang on to that at all costs, and I don't want anybody to dissuade me from it or show me that there might be more to do. I've created my own idols, and I'm sure that I've observed people as you have.
Yes, I was thinking. You're speaking personally. I will respond in kind. I was thinking recently of making an idol out of good health. You know, we think of often that status would be an idol, or money, or pleasure, or one's own particular area that one is interested in, and so on. I was thinking of good health as an idol. Of almost, it becomes an end in itself, or one isn't able to deal with sickness or with illness. One is so concerned about that. Of course, we got a health movement these days, which is marvelous. I think, you know, people are doing exercise or watching their diet and quit smoking and all of those kinds of things. I'm laughing a little there, Bob. I think I remember you working on that problem.
We're still working on it.
Yeah, that's
yes.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Smoking, that is. Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, and that's good and so on. But even that can become an idol.
It can become an obsession where you just, you know, everything goes, and that becomes the single focus of everything I'm doing. You know, I'm not even fun to live with at that point, let alone enjoying the goodness of life, or having a kind of, again, that balanced perspective of, hey, this is important, of course, take reasonably good care of your health, do the things that promote health, but also recognize that this body is an imperfect tool, and I may have to live with some debilitating factors, and that's not very pleasant or something to look forward to, but it's a reality that I may have to come to grips with.
Exactly. And that so that this good health, as I'm seeing it, can become as much an idol as anything else.
I think almost anything.
And then the key, I think, as you said, is living then with the limitations. And boy, I think of people who do that with such grace, and people who have been through so much and have so many bodily infirmities and so on, and still their spirit rises above them. I mean, they would be, you know, have, I guess, this sense of wisdom. I notice as you talk about this thing, you come back to that word perspective a lot, too, just as I do, and that takes us back to that general philosophical notion that wisdom has to do with having general principles and broad vision and a large picture of what's going on, and being able to fit the individual parts into some greater framework. So here, I guess what we'd want to do, picking up my personal example, is fit this business of health into a larger framework that sees God as the source of health, that realizes that one has to deal with limitations, that sickness is a part of life, that getting older, the body doesn't function as well, all of that sort of thing. Then you begin to get a wisdom in this area.
Well, I think I have seen that kind of wisdom and that beauty of which you spoke, particularly in older people who are shut-ins that I visit in the parish, you know, and I look at them and I'm devastated. I'm thinking, oh my God, if I were in a situation like that, I don't think I could handle. And they have a grace, that was a good use of the word, I think.
Yes.
A grace that says, yeah, it's not great, I don't enjoy doing this, but I'm compensated, and, you know, I've done this, and I've been able to put this together, and there are so many other things that I can still do now, or even some of them will say, so many things I can do now that I didn't take the time to do before. And they've managed to fit it all into that bigger picture, and to take
it's marvelous to behold.
Oh, that is true. That's inspiring.
Yeah, that is. It's a simple thing, and yet it's profound and inspiring. Bob, I want to go in a little different direction again with this problem of foolishness, ways we would be foolish. And I'm still looking at this passage from Exodus chapter 21 to 17, which is really the listing of the commandments. And it says in there, "In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord has blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now, what I'm getting out of that in terms of contemporary relevance is this question of the Sabbath and the day of rest. And I would see the foolishness involved in being a workaholic, for example, of not taking the Sabbath rest, of not building in proper leisure time, and so on. And again, it's such a cultural thing. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind, and there's things to do and places to go and demands on your time. And so many people I talk to, I think that busyness is the national disease or something. And you get back, is there a foolishness about this? What's it all about? Why are we doing this?
I think that it is one of the things that I think needs to be addressed most frequently.
I tried to get you on the phone the other day 5 times.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
you're
I'm not sure I was
running to
always
a different
busy.
meeting and doing
I was
things.
somewhere, but
Yeah.
I think that, I would even go one step beyond that, Jim, and simply say that even when people do take time off, they're still feeling guilty about it, or their mind's back at work, or I should be doing something else. And somehow I'm saying that isn't right. That is not healthy. It does not produce, again, that balanced person. I guess the place where I've seen it most evident and most devastating is with young, upcoming businessmen, entrepreneurs, people in the professions, and where they recognize that this is having a deleterious effect on their home situation, and the answer comes back, but I'm doing it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come back often and said, I hope they're there when you get finished. Now that's, it's pretty judgmental, I suspect, on my part.
But
at the
it's
same
realistic.
time,
I mean, how many times have we sat in our offices and listened in marriage counseling, and the husband is talking there, and the wife is saying it's too late. I mean, he says, well, who do you think I worked for all these years? Why did I put forth all this energy, earn all this money? It was all for you, so we could have it good later on. And she's saying it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah, we've got this marvelous house.
No.
We don't have a home. All those
Sad
cliche type
business.
things, but very real.
Yeah, and so, you're saying, well, judgmental, but you and I and anybody who deals with those kind of things have seen that happen so much, and there's a great sadness about it, because the truth of the matter is that very often all that work did grow out of love. I mean, it was an effort to do something for the family and to make it better life for the kids and all that time away from the home. But then you get back to this question of wisdom, foolishness. Was there something not wise in the approach taken?
Jim, I would even like to go one step further. I think there might be a very beguiling thing of some of the motivation that goes behind it. Not just the profit, the money making, that kind of thing. Sometimes people get so involved in volunteerism, church work, and we, on the other hand, are quite willing to say to them, yes, please do this job, and I've got 4 more for you. And we're doing the same thing. We're playing right into it. At some point, we all have to take a breath and a step backward and say, wait a minute, the wise thing needs to say, I need time to play, time to be with family, time to work, time to give of myself in service orientation situations, but
let's throw in another word there, balance. Isn't that in other words we associate perspective with wisdom, but also balance?
Yes.
So easy to get out of whack in life. It seems constant, right?
And to me, we're back to wisdom, foolishness.
Yeah.
When you're balanced, when you've got the perspective, you're in the arena of wisdom.
Right.
And when that's lacking, no, not
Right.
so.
And therefore
Foolish.
It becomes very easy to be foolish in so many different areas. Let me take one more of these areas where I would see foolishness, and that is, again, looking at the Exodus passage I've been referring to from chapter 20, which is the listing of the commandments. We could begin to ask ourselves about our very attitude towards commandments. There seems to be a couple ways we could deal foolishly with commandments. One would be as legalists, to set them up as some sort of absolute and slavishly follow them, and then to think we can go to God and say, I kept those 10 commandments, and now to give me my reward, so to speak. That would be one way, a common way of legalism that we talk about. I suppose the other way of getting out of balance with commandments is to say, well, they're all relative. They don't mean anything. I discard them. They have no meaning in my life. Commandments are passé. I learned those in grade school, but forget all this business. Thou shalt not kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, and so on. I'm beyond that, or it has no relevance for me. I have to just follow my own inner light or my own particular spirit inside of me. So I could see foolishness there in the way we deal with commandments, and an extreme difficulty in attaining a true wisdom about commandments.
Again, I think that I have probably experienced, and only by having gone through both the negative and the positive aspects of it vicariously and personally, the wisdom that came in that distillation of thought that we know as the Ten Commandments. Yeah, that it is a summation of wisdom. But the approach to it, as you suggest, is very, very important. We can get into that legalistic mentality of, how far can I go? How much must I do when I've done
before I've stolen and
before I've stolen, or how
how
much have I lied? And I'm not sure that that's conducive to genuine wisdom at all. As you said, a slavish obedience to them can put one totally out of the realm of the human and the humane. And somehow that doesn't speak to me of the genuine wisdom of a person who is seeking true godlike quality of wisdom. On the other hand, as you suggest, if you just say, well, I'm kind of beyond this, I've transcended this, I don't even need these, they've got to be the benchmark. And I've always got to keep going back to them and saying, wait a minute, there is something here that has transcended time and culture and everything else. What is it saying to me? How do I dare just presume that I'm so enlightened as to be beyond this? There may be an individual instance where that could be the case, but I'd be pretty darn cautious about that.
You used a phrase, Bob, in there that I liked a lot, the distillation of wisdom, to refer to what the commandments are. Yeah. I think that immediately puts it in a different light. The commandments are the wisdom of the community codified,
exactly.
Put into simple words and into a summation statement. And therefore it doesn't drop down out of the sky, but this is what people have seen works best in human affairs, that if we don't steal from one another, each one of us will be more secure and the society will run better and so on. So it is, I like a distillation of the wisdom of the community.
I think that, if you really looked at the commandments, you'd say, well, they're just kind of basic to human interaction. If we're going to have a society, we've got to have at least this as a minimum. Now, obviously, the law of Christ goes way beyond that, calls for much more. But if you don't have that basis, if you don't have that basic understanding of where things are, no. You cannot have a human interactive society.
I think it is, as I suggested before, a very difficult thing to attain wisdom on our relationship to laws and principles and guidelines. I mean, it seems to me we're sort of always struggling with that. It's not an easy thing to keep in perspective. I mean, how seriously do we take the principles here, or how do we apply them? What kind of prudence is involved as it gets down to the concrete sort of thing? I mean, most people are not walking around, in danger of killing someone else at this moment. However, there's other ways of saying how we harm people and a broadening out. I guess you could take it back to what Jesus said, I come not to destroy the law, to disband it, to get rid of the law, but to fulfill it. And there you get maybe the higher law and the law of love, as we like to talk about it, that Jesus gave us. And then maybe that's the perspective from which you have to begin to be wise about laws. Love is the law that can't finally be totally fulfilled.
I think that probably is the key to both the success of the fulfillment of the commandments and the success of ultimate wisdom. When one is in a love relationship, I don't think you're immediately looking to, will I break the love relationship so drastically that it's over forever? No, most of us live in kind of a up and down. But the person who's trying to enhance that love relationship is never looking to say, how far can I go? How much can I get away with? It's always the other direction. What can I do to make it better? What can I do to enhance this relationship? Well, if we can do that in our relationship with God, and obviously then it has to have the overflow in how I act and react and interact with you and with everybody else with whom I come in contact. Then we've not abandoned, we've fulfilled and given a grace to the commandments. We've come to real wisdom, trying to know that, trying to fulfill that.
That again takes us back, it seems to me, to the person of Christ in this passage I read at the beginning, Bob, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 22 to 25, where it said Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. And therefore, I guess we would say that if we want to see what wisdom looks like, we look at Jesus Christ. It's the Aristotelian notion. If you want to know what virtue is, then find a virtuous man and observe that person, how they act. And I think we could take that in this biblical sense here. What Paul is telling us is you want to know what true wisdom is, you observe Jesus Christ and the way he interacted with people, the way he related to the one he called Abba, Father, and so on. And then this wisdom becomes very concrete, but it also becomes paradoxical, and because you get that whole business of Christ is crucified in there. But do we want to stay with this a little bit about Jesus and his own wisdom? Let me just take up another scripture passage. This is from John's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 13 to 25. It's the story of Jesus throwing the people out of the temple. In the temple precincts, he came upon people engaged in selling oxen, sheep, and doves, and so on. And he makes a kind of whip of cords and drove them out of the temple area, sheep and oxen alike. Told those who were selling doves, "Get out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." His disciples recalled the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house consumes me." So I'm looking, Paul says Jesus is the model of wisdom. Here we see Jesus, maybe part of what I'd get out of that is he was able to mobilize his emotions. He mobilized his anger in order to be effective. He had a bigger picture that his house, the house of the Father, was for worship and not for this ripping the people off and through this marketing and so on.
I think one of the words that I've heard you use most frequently over the years is passion. He had a passion for the house of God, for the reverence of God's dwelling place. And, as you said, mobilized his emotions in fulfillment of that passionate desire for God to be recognized for who he was, for respect to be given, for people to act properly in that relationship. I think it's a marvelous example of, probably we would say, oh, that was a bit intemperate. He went a little too far,
Right.
And we've come back with justifiable anger. I think it was a passionate plea for recognizing who God is and keep this, again, in perspective, that kind of wisdom. And sometimes that does get carried away in human terms, foolishness by our standards, perhaps.
Let me try another phrase from that same passage of John's, that's chapter 2, verses 13 to 25. This is near the end of that passage, and they're talking about Jesus, and and it says a phrase, "He needed no one to give him testimony about human nature. He was well aware of what is in the human heart." I mean, there you find, there's wisdom. He didn't need anyone to tell him about human nature. He understood people, what made them tick. He often was able to key in on exactly the point that would turn them around or help them to see. Seemed like so many of the stories of the gospel show him to be wise in his human relationships.
I think that comes from two things, and the one I'm convinced of, his prayer life, his relationship with the Father, his deep introspection, but his willingness to examine himself, the times when he had to be alone, that whole episode of the temptations in the desert, all of that seems to me to be introspective, his need to withdraw and examine his own potential and his own both great and good, as well as not so great and not so good, and then to be able to see in people, to identify, to say, I know the human heart because I have a human heart. I can speak, and yet I can do things, I can do something with it to take it in a different direction.
It's so important to our general understanding of what Christianity is all about, this incarnational nature, that God does share our condition, and that God knows the condition from that side, that Jesus reveals the deepest secrets of the human heart. That seems so crucial to humanity of Jesus.
Absolutely.
And that he then knows the human heart directly, and he's insightful. Maybe he's got a practical wisdom. A lot of times Jesus doesn't give theoretical answers. Interesting, when he's asked tough theoretical questions of the law, he comes back with a story that provokes greater thought. It isn't even clear exactly what the story means a lot of times, but it is the wise teacher in action. He's going to get you to think about this.
And that is the wise man who gets you to do the thinking and come to the conclusion, rather than simply saying, here's the answer, or here's the law, here's the rule, here's the how-to.
It's probably one of the places where we see his wisdom most at work.
He was the most effective, wise teacher who drew out of his hearers that need for their own self-examination and then response. It's that invitation to response again.
Bob, there's another aspect of this wisdom that we need to look at, and that is the wisdom of the cross, as we say. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom. We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and an absurdity, a foolishness to Gentiles. And here we get, I think, the real paradoxical character of the gospel message, that it, in one sense, isn't reasonable. The reasonable Greek philosopher doesn't immediately see what it's all about. This is a strange business. This is in which the wisdom of the divine plan includes a man who knows rejection, a man who is disappointed by people, a man who's accused falsely and eventually crucified. This is a strange kind of wisdom at work in the divine plan. That's the paradox of Christianity, the death-resurrection theme.
I think it is exactly the, paradox would not be the right word, the antithesis of the American me-ism of so frequently invoked today, that if it doesn't profit me, if I don't get ahead, it's nothing. And I think that we miss the entire point of Jesus saying, you want to discover yourself, be willing to take the risk of loving, of going to the extent of giving yourself away in love to others. Yeah, by all human standards, that's foolish, because somebody's going to walk all over you. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to take advantage of you. But he says you'll discover yourself, and you'll discover, too, I think, that attractive power that can bring others finally to say, maybe that's not so foolish. Maybe that is okay.
That's a marvelous way, Bob, of bringing that Paschal mystery down to everyday life. I mean, when we say the Paschal mystery and we look at this foolishness here, we think immediately of Christ, Good Friday, death on the cross, and then resurrection. But I think what you were pointing out is that becomes a law of life in a way. It becomes a truth that has a universal aspect to it. It's something that it's put forward to us as the wisdom of the cross, as a way of living the Paschal mystery.
Exactly that, without losing the incarnational aspects. I don't want to make everything in simply the dying aspect, but the way of life that I see Jesus expostulating and calling others to, and being willing to go through in order to say, I'll show you the example and then see that you can follow, is the law of love that it is just comes to a capitulation in the cross.
And that's the way, too, Bob, I think, of getting at that outlook on the commandments. We were saying that we wanted to get a wisdom about the commandments. It finally is fulfilled in a general love, in a generous love that just goes beyond any minimalism and says, I will give of myself. I think we've been trying to look here at wisdom, the search for wisdom. We all like that. That's a beautiful quality, to be a wise person. And what we're saying is we find that in Jesus Christ. He's the wise man for us. He teaches us about self-sacrificing love, and that finally this is the way to live best and most humanly.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Father Robert Wilhelm, who is pastor of St. John the Baptist Roman Catholic Church in Toledo, Ohio. The topic of this week's Reflections was the crucified Christ, searching for wisdom. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Minister, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.